So today we're going to do basically walk through some concepts having to do with mental health, define what stigma is, and try to get underneath why these things might happen so that we can understand how to respond to our own needs and how to respond to other people as well. So that's basically the topic at hand today. And so I'm going to walk you through some slides and give you a sort of rundown on what the agenda is for this evening. I will say that I'm hoping to keep us maybe an hour-ish. We'll see, but it also just depends on the richness of the discussion. So I'm happy to hold space for that, but I wanted you all to know that that is where I'm headed. So as I've said, we're going to talk about mental health and trauma. I'm going to offer you some definitions, and then we're going to talk about stigma and how we might define it and actually feel it in our lives. Then, as has already been said, vulnerability will be discussed and again, sort of talked about in a way that makes it more about having it be a strength for us rather than something that we might define as a weakness. And then we'll dive into battling stigma with acceptance of ourselves and our needs so that we are actually able to refuel ourselves and our resilience. So that it's the agenda that I'm hoping to cover today. And in order to do that, what I often do to set the stage is to provide some norms for our engagement. So this is a learning space. And I think it's really important to start off with what are we agreeing to as a group in order to be here together. And so these are my offerings to you. And I want you to be thinking about if there's anything that you would like to add to these agreements that I'm about to go over, which are an adaptation from Courageous Conversations About Race from Glenn Singleton. So first is to stay engaged. I recognize that we are busy and important people. I was just told that there's a basketball game going on. There's a lot going on in our lives. And so in order for this to be a rich opportunity for everybody, whether you're watching this later or doing this now, try to be as engaged as possible. So what does that mean? What do you need in order to be present? Do you need a cup of coffee? Do you need some water? Do you need to be walking around? Is staying on camera helpful to you? Whatever it is that you need to be as engaged as possible, please do that. When you do share with each other in the small groups that we're going to put you in, and maybe in the large group as well, please make sure that you're using I statements. And what that really means is just make sure that you're speaking from your experience. You're not speaking for other groups of people, you're speaking for yourself and your experience. When you are listening to what either your colleagues in the room have to say or anything that I'm going over, trying to hold space for less judgment and more curiosity and notice if you have a reaction or you have a question, please ask, please tell the colleague that you're speaking to what you're thinking as best you can, because this idea is what helps us be open to learning. Because we are going to share with each other. This is something that I borrow from equity spaces as well. Make sure that the stories stay, meaning the details. So if I'm sharing something about my family, or you all are sharing something about your experiences, please don't walk away and say, well, Mayté said blah, blah, blah. It's really more about what is the insight or what is the connection that you've made through the story that you've heard. And what we do hope, both Glenn Ellis and I, what we do hope is that the lessons or the richness and the insight that you hear and learn from each other does leave this space, because that's how we all learn as well. Make sure that you're sharing the space, because sometimes some of us are really vocal and easy to sort of nudge into sharing things, and some of us have a harder time, and that's okay. We all have different levels of comfort with talking about our experiences. So just make sure that you're noticing that. Accept and accept non-closure, which means that while I did put a lot of concepts in place here, and this is about us thinking about mental health and thinking about breaking the stigma, it does not mean that by the end of this, you will be experts. It just means that we're setting the stage for continued conversation. So that's the idea of accepting non-closure. And take care of yourselves. There might be some things that you either see or hear me say that might, again, cause some sort of a reaction. Just make sure that you're noticing that. And if you need to step away, or if you need, again, a mobility break, get up and walk around or get some water, please do what you need in order to take care of yourself. You are the expert on what you need, no one else. And so make sure that you're doing that and just noticing. And as I've said, is there anything that you all would like to add to this set of agreements before we go on?
Is there a disclaimer? I can put a disclaimer. This is not therapeutic advice. This is all for educational purposes. So make sure that if any of these concepts resonate with you, you should reach out to a clinician that can help you for your individualized needs.
Excellent. Excellent addition. This is about learning, and if you need further support, please obtain it. Mental health defined according to the World Health Organization is a state of mental well-being that enables people to, using words that were shared, cope with the stresses of life, realize their abilities, learn well and work well, and contribute to their community. It is an integral component of health or overall wellness. And the other thing that I will highlight from this definition is that mental health is a basic human right. We all have it, we all need it, and we all use it to cope with daily living. Now, in addition to defining mental health, I wanted to bring forward the definition of mental health conditions. So mental health conditions include mental disorders and psychological disabilities, as well as other mental states associated with significant distress, impairment in functioning, or risk of self-harm. One way to differentiate between someone that is experiencing, let's say, good, in quotes, mental health or mental well-being is someone that might still have everyday stressors, just like we all do, because to live this human life that we all live is a vulnerable thing, and it comes with joy and with stress. And so all of those things are going to be something that we all handle and manage daily. The difference between mental health and mental well-being versus mental health conditions or disorders is that the disorder is having a significant impact on someone's daily functioning. So much so that they're, for example, not able to go about their day as they would typically. So that's the differentiator. And the other thing I want to mention that you see in the slide is people with mental health conditions and that are managing their mental health conditions are more likely to experience lower levels of mental well-being, but this is not always the case. So I think another thing that sometimes people assume is that if someone is managing a mental health condition or getting some sort of treatment for it and with it, it does not mean that they are impaired all the time or that they don't experience joy as well, right? So this is complex because we are all the sum of all of our parts, and all of our parts are sometimes going to feel either joy or some sort of distress. And all of that is perfectly normal because to live, again, is to be vulnerable. And the connection that people made was that in the movie Encanto, the family has experienced a traumatic event because they were basically made to leave their home and their country in order to be safe. And we see that at the very beginning of the movie. It is a Disney movie, so Disney always has very heavy topics and beginnings from my perspective. And then that leads to this whole conversation about, well, how are we managing? And the connection that is made is between mental health and, in this case, intergenerational trauma. And so I'm going to define this for you all and just highlight a few things. But really, again, and this is coming from the American Psychological Association, intergenerational trauma is basically talking about what can be transmitted from one generation to another. In this case, or in this definition, what it's defined as is it's a legacy or something that, again, is sent through generations in the form of a psychological consequence of an injury or attack or other traumatic experience that goes from one experience, so from the generation that actually lived it and experienced it, and it's shared across subsequent generations through the term epigenetics. So through this sort of genes being passed down generation by generation by generation. And when people have experiences, genes are expressed when the things that need to be put into place then lead to the expression of said gene or behavior. Now, trauma reactions. So there are many different ways that people might react to a traumatic event in their lives. In this case, when people talk about intergenerational trauma, some of the reactions could be anything from shame, which we'll talk about, increased anxiety, guilt, a heightened sense of vulnerability and helplessness, low self-esteem, depression, suicidality, substance use, and many more. Basically, all of these things are defining what trauma responses can occur. So trauma is the response to the traumatic event. So the event is something that happened. So in this case, happened potentially in generations past, that is then still affecting the generations today. And I think the other thing that I really want to make sure that I say here, that I often say when I'm talking about intergenerational trauma and why it's important to know and talk about, is that sometimes there might be behaviors or reactions, or to use the words that were shared before, you might be having a body response to something, your body might be feeling a particular way, and you are not necessarily able to pinpoint why that's happening. So I have grown to learn for myself that I think when things like that happen, I sort of step into curiosity and wonder, and I might not always have the answer, which unfortunately is the case for many people. We might not know, but I think it's helpful to know that it could be happening from something that happened to a different generation so that we can give ourselves more grace when we're noticing these things. Hopefully this is making sense. But basically the point here is that there are things that we don't talk about because they're uncomfortable. And yet in the talking about them, even if we don't know exactly where things come from, in the talking about it, we can actually move through the feeling and let go of the discomfort over time, which is basically in a nutshell what we're going to talk about or continue to talk about. So one possible summary of all of these things is that mental health is defined by the Loveland Foundation, who, if you don't follow them yet, I recommend that you do. They are company started by a writer who is a Black writer and feminist who basically creates spaces for people to have accessible therapy. And so mental health is real. It is critical. It's important for everyone. Everyone has it. As I said before, it is linked, as you all said, to physical health. There are things that change over time. It can be complicated and layered. I think that's another way of thinking about it. And it's something that needs to be taken care of, just like our physical selves. It is not all in your head, so it's not something that can be questioned. If you're feeling it, period. It is not a sign of weakness. It is not a taboo, but can be received that way. It is not something that you choose, and it's not something that hopefully should not cause shame, but often does. It's not something that you can just, quote, snap out of it, and it's not stable. It's a dynamic process, much like any sort of growth or physical sense or ailments. Now, one thing that I had added to that slide is, so then are mental health and mental illness the same? And my answer to that question is mental illness is basically, like I said before, mental health conditions that live sort of underneath the umbrella of mental health and well-being. So I think sometimes the words mental health and mental illness get conflated or get sort of used as though they are the same. And so I just want to make sure that we understand that mental health, generally speaking, is about our well-being and having to do with our mental and emotional states, and that there are mental health conditions that we might experience as well that might benefit from treatment and other supports. And so that's why it's important from my perspective to differentiate the two. So now I'm going to ask you all to write instead of go into breakouts, because I like to give people multiple ways of engaging with material. So here's what I would like you all to do. This is the invitation. So as we've said, we're talking about breaking the stigma around mental health. So what I would like you to do is think of a time when you shared something and felt shame, or for those of us that speak Spanish in the room, vergüenza. So when you felt shame wash over you, what happened? Or if that's not coming to you, another way of thinking about this is think of a time you shared something vulnerable about mental health and you felt judged. What happened in that instance? So as I've said, you've done this writing activity, and I want you to hold space for what you wrote and how you're feeling in your body as you wrote these words or thought about these things. And I'm going to give you the definition, again, the sort of dictionary definition of stigma. So stigma is a set of negative and unfair beliefs that a society or group a group of people have about something, right? So it's another way of thinking about this from my perspective is it's a judgment. Another definition that you see here in the slide is it is a mark of shame, which we will define shortly. And something that I hadn't noticed until I was preparing for this is the sort of the marker. In this case, there's the example of stigmata, which is an identifying mark or characteristic that is a sign of something. In this case, interesting that they chose this example specifically, a specific diagnostic sign of a disease. So just think, again, holding space for both the dictionary definition of this word, what it might mean culturally speaking, how there's definition has to do with a diagnostic sign of disease and the sort of discomfort that people have with illness and disease connected to this idea of stigma. And then for those of us that maybe know about this in religion, the stigmata, the markers on Jesus Christ and what that means, right? So that's the reason that I say this, it's a very loaded word. Right. And so in order to talk about it, we have to define it and then talk about what is the sort of antidote or the opposite of this. And so before we go into that, I want you to, again, to hold space for what is stigma, how is it defined? And we're talking today about breaking that stigma in order to be able to meet our own needs. And when the time is right, share those needs with other people in our lives. And so now I want you to think about this and just sort of call out answers or type them in the chat. What do you think might be the reason that people in our lives sometimes don't want to talk about mental health or mental health supports, treatment, what have you? What do you think is causing the stigma around talking about mental health? So these are my thoughts about why some people in our lives or ourselves might have a feeling of stigma or have a struggle in talking about mental health or mental health supports. So one is fear of the unknown. Fear is something that we don't understand, that people are in our lives don't understand, as you all have said, a lack of vocabulary and shared vocabulary to have any sort of dialogue around what mental health is or means to you or to them. So again, one is fear of the unknown. The other might be fear of judgment. I was actually talking to my mother about this, and I asked her directly in her journey to listening to her daughter, who is a psychologist, about her process and her emotions and what that means for her. I wanted to know, what does she think, or did she think this was a barrier of sorts? And she didn't say this for herself, but she was just talking, and she said in Spanish to me, it's miedo al que dirán, which in a translation of that is basically, what are people going to say? So if I say this, or if I am someone in the family circle and I hear my daughter, niece, child, son, whomever share something, I'm already having a shame response around what are people going to say. And so if I name it, now it's out there, it's alive. I'm using words, I can't take them back, right? Like there's a fear of judgment that is coming up for people sometimes when we're talking about mental health. Another possibility is couple. One is feeling accountable for impact. So again, it depends on the situation, but what I mean by that is if someone is talking about their mental health or their emotional responses to things or their needs in order to cope, as Trisha said before, there might be a concern that if, for example, I'm talking about somebody in my family or something related to a family member, that they're going to feel like I'm holding them accountable for the impact of their behavior on my life. And that feels, again, heavy because people, to quote some of the things that you all have said, we don't always have the tools to know how to receive that. And so because we don't have the tools to receive it, we want to push it away because we don't want to be held accountable for impact, which I will also say in terms of us wanting to be our best selves in this world. There's a lot of conversation around being able to identify my impact, not just my intention. Right, so there's a lot here, but I just wanted to name that. Then there are cultural differences, something that Glenn Ellis said to me when we were prepping and talking about this was that, okay, let's say that you are talking about mental health with someone or your mental health needs or a struggle that you're having that you need support around, something that is connected to going to therapy, for example, or having a therapeutic conversation with someone might not be something that people in your lives have as much experience with, and they would rather you find support in going to church, for example. Doesn't mean you can't, right? Because we all have, again, we all have lots of different parts, and all our different parts have lots of different needs. And so for some of us, a spiritual connection is very important and supportive. And we might also need that and a therapeutic intervention of some sort, right? But I think the point here is in cultural differences or understanding that different cultures talk about mental health differently, or just don't even have the vocabulary in the way that some of us might, right? And that's a cultural difference across all different kinds of cultural identities, not just ethnicity or racial background. It can be whatever community you belong to, generational differences between those of us that might be slightly younger than me, slightly older than us, right? Like all of these different things are going to have an impact on how we talk about mental health. And then the last sort of offering for me that came up as I was thinking about this for you all is when people talk about mental health or obtaining mental health supports, and if they have, again, an uncomfortable reaction to the discussion, it might also be that they just don't know that treatment can work. So not only is there a lack of understanding or a lack of vocabulary, there's a lack of experience within, again, a community, a setting, a family that doesn't actually show them that talking about mental health is helpful and that obtaining mental health support and treatment can actually increase someone's mental health and mental well-being, as we've said, which then, by the way, has a positive impact on your relationships across the board. So these are my offerings to you about why it might be difficult to talk about. So now I had you all do this writing activity around talk about a time where you shared something having to do with your mental health and you felt that shame or you felt vulnerable and felt judged. So now I want you to flip it and talk to each other about a time when you felt really heard or listened to. So there was a time when you were in struggle and you needed support and you felt very supported by the listener. What helped you feel heard? Thank you. So what Brené Brown talks about in the vulnerability video is first, what is it about difficult emotions that might be difficult or difficult concepts and topics? And she recognizes for herself that as a social worker and as a researcher, she's interested in what she calls messy things, but she wants to clean them up and measure them and put them away. Or make it something that you can in some ways control and make less messy. And the reality is, as we've been saying, that mental health and mental health concepts and just our emotional well-being is complex. It's multi-layered. And so it's a little messy. And, you know, there's fun in that. It just makes it easier to sort of have a reaction to and to want to avoid it. And so there's this need to measure or to clean things up. There's, again, this conversation about shame. So the way that she defines it is, shame is there something about me that if other people know or see it, I won't be worthy of connection anymore. And that fear, another way of saying that is the fear of disconnection is what that shame is. And so what might stop us from sharing around our mental health journeys might be this fear, not only of judgment, but of disconnection. And that fear of reduction, because we are, as this also says, because we are human beings, we are neurobiologically hardwired to connect for survival. So the reason that we choose to be in community the way that we're doing right now, the way that we find our communities or are in a community in our families when we're lucky, we are doing all of that because to be in a group is to survive. It's an evolutionary reaction to survival. And so what that means is when we fear that disconnection or feel it, when you say something and someone dismisses what you're sharing, then you're having a stress response to the real fear and threat of being discounted and no longer belonging to a group of people. And so then you are afraid and you shut down. Or again, shut down, avoid, whatever it is. So there's a stress response that's going to happen because of that fear. The less you talk about shame, the more you have it. The flip side of that is the more you talk about what you believe to be shameful and the more empathy you receive in return, it's no longer shame. Because what's happening is you're shifting from thinking that this is a sort of an inherent part of who I am rather than I'm having an experience. So she talks about the difference between shame and guilt. Shame is I'm an awful person. Guilt is I made a mistake, I did something and I can rectify it. But my behavior is separate from my worthiness and my selfhood, because to be human is to be worthy. We don't have to prove anything. The way that I like to think about this, which is probably going to sound very, I don't know, romantic in some sense, but when we're walking around in nature and you see flowers or you see a tree or the weather is happening, we're not questioning it. We just admire it for what it is. We're just in awe of it for what it is, for something that's alive. So same way that we should be able to, and hopefully are able to, feel the worthiness for ourselves and for the people in our lives. So again, in order for us to have less shame, we have to be able to connect. And in order for connection to happen, here comes the vulnerability part. We have to allow ourselves to be fully seen. So another way of thinking about what vulnerability is to be vulnerable, is to allow yourself to be fully seen without knowing what the outcome is going to be of whatever conversation or moment that you're having with somebody. That's the uncertainty. That's the emotional exposure, because you don't know. Even if you have created spaces or felt psychologically safe, we can't predict it, right? And at the same time, the only way to connect and to have that empathy opportunity, let's say, is to allow yourself to be fully authentic in whatever's going on and to be fully seen. And then the last thing I'll say, which is just another beautiful sort of way of summarizing a lot of these terms, is vulnerability, again, as Brené Brown defines it, is the most accurate measurement of courage. So to be courageous, we have to be vulnerable. And we can't be vulnerable without risking something. And that's where the courage is coming from. And apparently, as she has said many times, courage and the original root word in Latin from it is cor, which means heart. And the original definition of courage is telling the story of who you are with your whole heart.
Love that.
Me too. And so think about that, right? So in order to tell the story of who I am with my whole heart, I have to choose to be vulnerable and let my full self be seen and allow for the opportunity for someone to hold space for me the way that you're holding space for me right now in this moment. That we can feel. And because we're connected in this way, we are in some ways working, as she also says, our vulnerability muscles so that next time I'm in distress or someone I love is in distress, I'm able to hold space in a better way because I've been practicing. Because the more you do it, just like everything, right? The more you do it, the better you get at it. Doesn't mean it's going to be easy, but you get better at it. And we do all of this. What this all leads to is having more acceptance of our own experience so that we can better respond to our own needs first, which I recognize is hard for many of us in this room, given our cultural background and our experiences, generally speaking. And so again, vulnerability is not winning or losing. It's having the courage, as I've said, to show up and be seen when we have no control over the outcome. Vulnerability is not weakness. It's our greatest measure of courage, again, in summary. And so this all also connects to something that is really, from a psychological perspective, is one of the best things I think that research has proven time and time again, which is that our brains, our experiences impact the makeup of our brain. And so the more experiences, the more positive experiences we have, the better we're able to heal whatever traumatic experiences or wounds we might carry, because our brains are actually changing in real time. You all can look this up. You can see the neural pathways happening, which is just amazing. And the reason that that is important is because sometimes when we're talking about heavy things or mental health or mental illness or trauma, I think sometimes we forget to talk about the other side of this, which is that post-traumatic growth is possible. And not only is it possible, but it's connected to this idea of resiliency, right? And to knowing that you can get through something. And when you get to the other side of it, you've again used these tools and used these muscles and actually created new neural pathways in your brain that over time make it actually feel safer to talk about these things. So the more I do it, the more I receive it, the more connection is had, the easier it's going to be for me to be vulnerable and to be authentic the next time that I need to do it or want to do it. So holding space for that as I keep going on this. What we want to come to is then how do we refuel this resiliency that, again, many of us probably have very resilient upbringings. We have moments of resiliency in our lives, and we also might have moments in which we don't feel like we can, but we do it anyway, right? So there's resiliency in that. But there's also this perception that I feel like sometimes is connected to resiliency, which is that of perfection. So resiliency is about overcoming and adapting, being flexible and being successful, crossing whatever the barrier might be. And it doesn't actually mean that you have to be perfect in order to be resilient. But I feel like in many communities, especially communities that have been oppressed over time, there is that sense, because again, to be vulnerable feels unsafe, and we can't be unsafe if we want to survive. So these are the things that we're trying to break in recognizing these things. So from a, thank you for the snaps, from a APA point of view, this is how resiliency is defined. Resilience is the process and outcome of successfully adapting to difficult or challenging life experiences, especially through mental, emotional, and behavioral flexibility and adjustment to external and internal demands. And so there are many things that we might overcome, but we are battling the idea that we have to be perfect in order to do so. So what you see before you now is this other website and author and clinician who has Brown Girl Therapy on Instagram, if you all want to follow her. And so she had this whole slew of slides around being the eldest daughter in immigrant households or children in immigrant households, because I think it applies to many people. But whoever feels responsible, using some of the words that y'all have shared, for the well-being of the family or the unit, And this idea that you may have learned at a young age to be helpful, to be the person that is helpful and accommodating for other people, that you are that role model to follow for those that come after you and for those that you are following. But this pressure of perfectionism has overcome you at a cost. And what I make that connection to is, if I want to destigmatize mental health, if I want to be my authentic self, I have to be vulnerable and show that all parts of me are worthy, even if I'm having a struggle, because perfection isn't actually attainable. There is no such thing as perfection. What we're doing, though, is we're showing, and actually Brene talks about this as well, what we're doing is armoring up. So we're showing perfection on the outside, and to use words that you all shared before, and internally we're struggling, but sometimes choosing not to share that. Another way that I like to think about this, that a friend has talked about before, is think about a duck that's swimming in a lake or swimming in water. And when you're looking at the duck, it looks so peaceful, it's beautiful, what have you, of course. And what is happening underneath? Thank you for the smiles. Exactly. Underneath, that little duck is working it
Pedaling
out.
away.
Yes,
Pedaling away.
pedaling away, but we don't see it. And for all we know, when the duck is safe on shore or having a conversation with its duck friends, it's saying, whoo, that was a hard swim. I don't know, that was really tough. And then the other duck might be like, yeah, dude, that was hard. Boom, there's empathy. I'm no longer ashamed that I was out of breath by the time that my swim was over, because my duck friend felt it with me, right? Like this, that's basically what this is all boiling down to, is that the more that you talk about it, the easier it will become, and the more you'll be able to honor your own feelings. So another way that I like to think about this idea of refueling myself and ourselves when it comes to mental health and being authentic about our journeys is to wonder why, is to be curious. And if you remember, one of the guidelines for our discussion is to reduce judgment. So the hope here is not only to reduce judgment of other people, but to reduce judgment of myself. So extend grace to myself and be curious about why I'm responding the way that I am, in order to then be able to honor what I'm thinking and feeling and what I need, right? So what you want to do, which you all were starting to talk about, is notice when you need space to share about what is going on, whether that is a therapeutic intervention, seeing a therapist, talking to a trusted friend, talking to someone in your family. So notice when you have that need, and when you share, is this person someone that has provided you with psychological safety to share? And so then do so, right? So there's awareness of self, and then awareness as much as you can of what someone has taught you over time about whether or not they actually listen to what you have to say and make you feel heard, right? So in this case, you are wondering why. Again, to shift from judgment to curiosity, you just want to try to do these words. I wonder why. I wonder why they're reacting this way. I wonder why I'm reacting this way. I wonder what it is that I need in order to respond instead of react. So be curious about you is the first step that I would say to continue this mental health journey and the reducing of stigma around talking about your mental well-being and your emotional states. And then to get curious about other people. And I also wanted to say, which is something that Glenn and I talked about when we were preparing for this, which was this idea that you're reducing stigma so that you're better able to talk to other people about mental health in a way that they're able to hold it. And I also think it's really important to recognize that we don't control other people's behaviors. So things that we can control, thank you for the nods. So what we don't control are other people's feelings or behaviors, or reactions. We don't control what other people think about me or about ourselves. And sometimes we don't control the situation, right? So a situation is occurring that we don't have any control over. What do we have control over? We have control over our own selves, our own emotions, and recognizing what you need in the moment, which is what, again, this is all about. So it's this balance between self-awareness and then awareness of other, and also awareness that it's still going to be a vulnerable thing when you share, when you talk about this, but the more you do it, you are in essence reducing that shame, thereby breaking that stigma. And over time, if people are open to it, the more you do it, the more they will practice as well. So there is this modeling that's happening that you sort of touched on when you're giving people vocabulary, or when you're maybe dropping a hint that you're going to talk about this tomorrow, or like, oh, I had this really good conversation with my best friend about this, right? Because the other thing that I think sometimes gets lost in these conversations, so again, we talked about stigma, is that when we're living our lives, the wounds that happen don't happen to just me. So multiple people are impacted, right? So we don't get wounded alone, but we also don't heal alone. Often when I'm talking about mental health and healing through difficult things, the healing and the neuroplasticity, the new neural pathways that happen, the reason that they happen is because something is happening in relationship. This is the reason why I can't give myself therapy. If only, right? I have to talk to someone else about it. And so I grow because I have space where someone is reflecting back, a mirror to myself, such that I can see what is it that I really need or what am I working towards? Where did I stumble? Where can I get back up? And every time I do that with, whether it's with a therapist, whether it's with a trusted person in my life, every time I do that, there's healing happening because what felt unsafe before is starting to slowly feel safer and safer. And I think the other thing that, again, for me comes up with this conversation is, which I think, Glenn, where you were touching on, is boundaries. So boundaries are basically what is okay with me and what's not okay with me. And so if I think about boundaries in mental health and this idea of breaking the stigma and being able to talk about what I'm feeling and thinking and struggling with, if that's what's happening, is my boundary is if something happens, I'm going to tell you about it and you might not like it, but I'm going to do it anyway. And so the thing that I didn't quite put in a slide is this idea that when you talk about these things with people that are not yet able to hear you in the best way, or don't have the vocabulary yet, or again, have this emotional or stress body reaction, is that you are doing this in order to honor yourself first. And then their reaction is their reaction. It doesn't mean you can't get curious and you can't have empathy for why, which is why this slide is showing you again these reasons why people have a hard time talking about mental health and mental health supports, because we can all empathize with these things, right? That's not hard to do. I think what's difficult sometimes is finding this balance between, I know my loved one doesn't want to talk about this, or they get uncomfortable, or they're like, oh yeah, I know you're going to go to therapy today or whatever. And it doesn't mean that I can't still share what's important to me, because in doing so, you're still healing by doing that. And the more that, again, and the more that you do it, the better it gets, in essence. So with that, I will end by saying this, and then we can have time to process. What we seek when we're thinking about sort of compassion for ourselves and compassion for others is, and this is from Tattoos on the Heart, which is a book that I'm often talking about with people that are providing some sorts of supports and helping professions, but it applies to everybody, is a compassion that can stand in awe of what people have to carry rather than stand in judgment about how they carry it. So another way of thinking about this, because again, I'm a visual person, is to recognize, and this is both for empathy for ourselves and for other people, that we all have these invisible backpacks that we carry. And for some of us, some of these things are visible. I want to recognize that as well. Some things are more visible than others. But if I'm talking about mental health and mental health conditions, there are things that we don't see that people are holding. And there are also things that we hold that we don't even know about. Right. And so it's important, it's helpful, I think, to think about it from that perspective, because maybe over time, and this is the other visual to this, the more that you share, the less that you carry.
Vulnerability feels so, like, to say it with your whole heart, like that feels really good. You know what I mean? Like saying it who you are with your whole heart is like, I love that because it feels human. It feels you. It feels not scary. It is scary, but it feels like a bigger opportunity is than it is to than we think of it. We think of it as a scary thing, right? If we're talking about being ourselves, our whole selves, good, bad, vulnerable, not vulnerable, that feels like a like something I'm gonna take, like, oh, I love that.
Well, and I think, and if I can bring it back to the question that I asked you all about, when are the times in which you feel the most listened to and the most heard? I know that if I'm giving that sort of definition in conversation, what it feels like for me is to be fully seen. And I also feel like for those of us that are bicultural or have all, and we all do have all different cultural identities, when I can show up somewhere and have all of my cultural identities be seen, and maybe not all, but at least two, that feels so powerful to me because it doesn't happen often. Right.
Yeah.
And so it's not an experience that I have all the time. And when I do have it, it just brings me this, again, this sense of belonging that is just such a beautiful experience. And I think that the beauty of, again, doing these things where you're sharing what's really going on with your whole heart in an authentic way, even though it feels scary, and it is, because I feel it. I mean, I feel it now having this conversation because I'm invested and I don't know how you all are going to receive this. I don't know how people out there are going to receive this, right? But I have to let go. I have to trust that you will take what it is that is helpful and you will leave what didn't resonate, and that's all fine. As long as I feel like I'm being authentic with you, that's really all that matters. And if you think about, again, what do I need to be heard? Then you are heard. And as you said, then that's the opportunity, because then you do that and you feel connected. And then because you feel connected, you feel safe. And then on and on and on I go, right? Like that is the cycle over and over again, which is also why I think it is really important to sort of have your chosen people. And so I think another thing that I would sort of recommend as a, not so much a homework assignment, but like as something to consider and reflect on is, who are your people? So not only how do you feel heard, yes, and then the people in this group are your people, and that's amazing, right? And the thing is, like, I would venture to guess you are each other's people. And how often do you have this kind of conversation?
More often than you think.
Which is great. And
If
so
they're
that's,
friends with me, if they know me, more
then
often
they know
than
that's
you
who you
think.
are. Exactly. And then the more that you do it, because also in these kinds of groups, I feel like there's always one person that's more comfortable than another. But when you're more comfortable, then you're modeling for the other person, if it's harder, that, oh, it's okay. I survived it. Even though it feels threatening and it feels like I'm not going to be okay, the beautiful thing about vulnerability is you do it. And when people receive you, oh, there's no better feeling.
Great. And it's kind of why I created this community to begin with. Like the idea is like at the end of the day, thank you, Mayté, by the way.
Right.
Um, at the end of the day, what I want for Levanto and the people of Levanto is for them to feel safe, seen, supported, less stressed, and better prepared. And when you said community is survival, that was like, yes. Like it felt I know that's what it is, but it's just like we are hardwired for it.
We
And
are.
to have spaces like this, to be vulnerable, to be open for all of our identities to be seen in spaces that outside can't be seen for the fear of, being weak or vulnerable in unsafe situations because of all the things we carry, but also because of the very real world situations that we're living. Um, so having spaces like this, having conversations like this, having experts to also validate the things that we're feeling, because sometimes because these are emotional topics or mental health, oh yeah, the community song. um, because these topics are about emotional things, things are you can't see that aren't tangible. Um,
Mm,
they is it just me is something that like comes up a lot, I think, for me, for people I talk to. And
mm.
then when you find that shared moment, a connection, it's just like, oh, it's not in my head, this is not
And
this
you know what? Just
me.
because I don't want to lose it, when you said tangible, I think that that's the other thing when we're talking about mental health, and we don't always have the words to talk about it, or we don't have the words to just name an emotion. That's why something like a feelings wheel is so helpful. When we haven't been taught that, or we haven't sought support in order to learn that, we don't have the words, but we have the feeling in our body, right? Like we all know what that feels like. We can all recognize that, but might not be able to explain it or to describe it. And the beauty of having those words is that you've then made the thing that feels squishy and complicated and like I can't talk about it. When you put a name to it, then you're also better able to look at it and talk about it. Also better able to look at my behavior as separate from me
Mhm.
because I'm learning, because I'm human, right? I'm not perfect. No one's perfect. We're all learning. We're all works in progress at all ages, and it doesn't stop. That's what my mother would say. Learning never stops. It's just it's a constant thing. And there has to be a sort of, again, a vulnerability and a willingness to learn, which is, I think, clearly what you all have, and what this community is meant to be doing, is bringing people together to do this and to practice, because
Yeah.
everybody has different levels of experience and comfort with it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. I did have one question to
Oh,
first
yes, please.
come up when you said that. So like because you said this is a constant journey and you're always learning and you're always, how do you not get fatigued with the constant working on yourself, or the constant like
Mm,
navigating conversations, or the constant like, yes, progress is over perfection, but like you're always in this progress mode. Like how do we navigate that, or
mm.
coping mechanisms? I don't even know if it's coping, but like that's what I think of.
So I think one of the things, which is, kind of connected to one of the guidelines that I gave about accepting non-closure, is that to learn, or to borrow from a definition of cultural humility is to learn always. So you're not going to be mental health competent. So just like cultural competency is helpful, but it's not the only thing, right? Being someone that is engaging in cultural humility is about understanding that learning is constant. And the reason that that is important is because there's always something else to learn and to be curious about, because we are complex and we carry multitudes, right? To echo a tribal nation person, we all carry multitudes. And so we need to be able to be willing to learn and to recognize that there isn't going to be a stop, which I know might not be the easiest to hear.
I
However,
like it. I like
but I
that.
think part of what you're asking though is, how do I sustain myself in this? Because it can get tiring. Actually, Brene Brown calls, in another video, she talks about the vulnerability hangover. So when you have, and I'm sure that you all have had experience with this, even when the conversation is great, when you share something that's very vulnerable emotionally and emotionally exposing, even if it turns out wonderful and you feel heard, you are going to be tired. And so what I would say is, that's why you have to take a pause. That's why you do things like take a deep breath. That's why you do things like, maybe you go on a walk and you listen to a walking meditation. Maybe you make sure that you are being fed. And actually, to echo something Shanae just said about the physical body and the mental health states, is that in order to sustain yourself, you have to be physically healthy as well. Right. So I think it's, again, just recognizing what you need. And then one other thing that sort of resonated or stuck out when you were asking this question, which is sort of choosing who you speak to and who you don't. I think that that is the other way to manage. So like, if you know that if you're going through a struggle or you need support, you want to probably first choose a person that you know will be able to hear you. So I can give you all a perfect example. So my father passed away almost 4 years ago now. And in that process, and in my continued grieving and adjustment process, I know the people that can hold space for me when I'm in struggle and I want to talk about this, or at least just name, this is going on. I don't need you to fix it, but I just need you to know that I'm vulnerable right now, or this is happening for me right now, which, by the way, I'm doing much more now given the state of the world. In white spaces, also with people that are not experiencing the same thing as those of us that are people of color, right? Like, so I think part of the lesson there is, know who to go to that is going to provide you with that. And then if you want to, keep working on the people that you'd like to over time be more open and be able to hold space for you, but just know who that best person is, which is why I was thinking again about this exercise as you walk away from this. Who are your people? And also recognizing that, okay, it's beautiful that you are your people to each other. And if you have, like, what is it in sports? The whatever team and the what am I trying to
Bench,
say?
these bench players.
Yeah, like people that come in to sub in or whatever,
Mhm.
or like varsity and junior
Your
and JV,
relief,
that's what I
your
was
relief
thinking.
players.
The
Yeah.
varsity and the JV team. I don't know why I'm thinking it was sports metaphor. That could have
You know, it's fitting today.
right, but oh, that's right. I knew there was a reason. But yeah, so just think about the fact that because we are all
Oh,
human, we
first
all need
string and
moments.
second string. That's what it is.
There
First
you
string.
go. That's
second
it.
string.
That's it. That's exactly it. And so just recognize that you have your first string people, but your first string people have their own stuff going on too. So they might not always be able to give you that space. And so if they can't, then who's your other person? And actually, just because I'm on this, I think another thing that's really helpful and again has to do with awareness of self and of others is that when you are needing to talk about some sort of mental health struggle that you might be having, you want to give yourself the opportunity to say it, but then to know that someone might be able to hear it and someone might not be able to hear it. And the flip side of that is I'm a very supportive human being. And there might be spaces and times in which I don't have it in me. I haven't refueled enough. And all of that is okay. And those kinds of conversations happen again and again. I'm a broken record, but happen over time. The more you practice the ability to say, oh yeah, I'm totally ready. I'm good. I can do this today. I want to talk about this. Beautiful. Or you know what? I don't think I can. I really want to. I'm going to talk about it with you tomorrow.
Mhm, mhm,
Or a person that I love, I'm going to hear you and you're going to have whatever reaction to the choices that I make, but those are your choices and your reactions. And these are mine.
mhm.
There's a boundary again, right? So all of these things are interconnected, but I think serve the purpose and connect to the question that you're asking, which is how do I continue to make this progress? And what do I do when I'm tired? So if you're tired, take a moment, take a breather, and then refuel with your first string, second string people.
Love that. Thank you so much, Mayté. I really appreciate it. Another 2-hour Levanto event.
I
Guys,
know.